In August of 2017, three teenagers from the small town of Cedar Ridge, Colorado, told their parents they were going camping for the weekend in the nearby Rockwood Mountains. They packed their gear, loaded up an old pickup truck, and drove into the wilderness on what should have been a simple adventure. 2 years would pass before anyone understood what happened to them. In October of 2019, a construction crew working on a new hiking trail made a discovery that would haunt the community forever. Inside a rusted metal barrel, partially buried beneath years of fallen leaves and mountain debris, they found human remains. The dental records confirmed what everyone feared but needed to know. One of the missing teens had been found, but the circumstances raised more questions than answers. On the morning of August 18, 2017, 16-year-old Jason Whitmore woke up early in his family's modest home on Maple Street. His mother, Linda, remembered him being excited about the camping trip he had planned with his two best friends. According to her testimony, he packed methodically, checking his list twice, making sure he had everything from matches to a first aid kit. He was always the responsible one, she said later, the one who thought ahead. His friend Noah Brennan, also 16, arrived at the house around 7 in the morning driving his father's 1998 Ford pickup truck. Noah was different from Jason, more impulsive, more likely to take risks, but the two had been inseparable since elementary school. The third member of their group was 15-year-old Caleb Frost, the youngest but perhaps the most adventurous. He lived 2 blocks away and had been talking about this camping trip for weeks. The boys had chosen Rockwood Mountains because it was familiar territory. They had hiked there with their families, knew the main trails, and felt confident about spending 2 nights in the wilderness. Their plan was simple. Drive to the Rockwood entrance, hike about 3 miles to Crystal Lake, set up camp, and spend the weekend fishing and exploring. They were supposed to return Sunday evening before dinner. Linda Whitmore watched them load the truck with camping gear, 3 backpacks, a cooler full of food and fishing equipment. She took a photo of them standing by the truck, all 3 smiling, giving thumbs up to the camera. That image would later appear on missing person posters throughout Colorado. The boys left Cedar Ridge at approximately 8 in the morning. Several people saw them that day. Tom Garrett, who owned the gas station at the edge of town, remembered them stopping to fill up the truck and buy snacks. They seemed in good spirits, he told investigators, joking around and talking about catching fish. Around 9:30, a park ranger named Susan Holbrook saw them at the Rockwood entrance. She checked their camping permit and reminded them about fire safety. Everything seemed normal. They told her they were heading to Crystal Lake, a popular spot for local campers. She watched them drive up the mountain road until they disappeared around a bend. The weather that weekend was perfect for camping. Clear skies, warm days, cool nights. Other hikers in the area reported nothing unusual. A couple from Denver who were camping near Crystal Lake said they heard voices and laughter on Friday night, presumably from the boys' campsite, but they never saw them directly. Saturday passed without incident, at least as far as anyone knew. But when Sunday evening came and went with no word from the boys, their parents began to worry. Linda Whitmore called the Brennan and Frost families. None of them had heard anything. By 10 that night, they contacted the Cedar Ridge Police Department. Police Chief Robert Dalton initially treated it as a typical case of teenagers losing track of time. Kids often stayed out longer than planned, especially when camping. But when Monday morning arrived with still no sign of them, the situation became serious. A search party was organized, consisting of local police, park rangers, and volunteers from the community. They found Noah's truck parked at the Rockwood entrance, exactly where it should have been. The vehicle was locked, windows up, with no signs of disturbance. Inside the glove compartment was the camping permit and a receipt from the gas station. The search team followed the trail to Crystal Lake. It took them about 2 hours to reach the area where the boys had planned to camp. What they found was puzzling. There was evidence of a campsite, a fire ring with cold ashes, some scattered food wrappers, and marks where a tent had been pitched. But there was no tent, no backpacks, no personal belongings except for a single hiking boot that belonged to Caleb Frost. The boot was sitting upright next to the fire ring, placed there deliberately, not dropped or lost. Search dogs were brought in to track the boys' scent. The dogs led the teams in circles, picking up trails that went in multiple directions before losing them near a rocky area about a mile from the campsite. It was as if the boys had scattered in different directions, but why would they do that? The search continued for 2 weeks. Helicopters scanned the mountains, volunteers combed through every trail and off-trail area, and divers even checked Crystal Lake, though it was shallow and clear enough to see the bottom. Cave systems in the area were explored, old mining shafts were inspected, and every possible scenario was considered. Had they gotten lost? Had there been an accident? Had they encountered a dangerous animal? None of the theories explained the abandoned campsite or the single boot left behind. As days turned into weeks, hope began to fade. The parents appeared on local news, pleading for information. Posters with the boys' photos were distributed throughout Colorado and neighboring states. A reward fund was established, eventually reaching $50,000 for information leading to their whereabouts. Detective Amanda Porter was assigned to lead the investigation after the initial search efforts yielded no results. A 15-year veteran of the Cedar Ridge Police Department, she had handled missing person cases before, but nothing involving 3 teenagers who seemed to have vanished without a trace. Her first step was to conduct detailed interviews with everyone who had seen the boys before their disappearance. The gas station owner, Tom Garrett, provided security camera footage showing the boys at his station. The timestamp read 8:47 a.m. on August 18th. The video showed them laughing and pushing each other playfully while Noah filled the tank. They appeared relaxed and happy, with no signs of distress or unusual behavior. Detective Porter also interviewed park ranger Susan Holbrook multiple times. Holbrook had been working at Rockwood for 12 years and had an excellent memory for details. She remembered the boys clearly because they had been so polite and well prepared. They had shown her their camping permit, asked about current fire restrictions, and inquired about the best fishing spots at Crystal Lake. What struck her as notable was how organized they seemed, especially Jason, who appeared to be the unofficial leader of the group. He had a laminated map in a plastic sleeve and kept checking it while they talked. Nothing about their demeanor suggested they were planning anything other than a normal camping trip. The investigation expanded to include the boys' personal lives. Detective Porter examined their school records, social media accounts, and interviewed friends and teachers. All 3 attended Cedar Ridge High School and were described as good students with no history of serious trouble. Jason was on the debate team and worked part-time at a local hardware store. Noah played basketball and was known for his sense of humor. Caleb, despite being the youngest, was considered mature for his age and had recently earned his Eagle Scout badge. None of them had been involved in drugs, gangs, or risky behavior that might explain a sudden disappearance. Their digital footprints were analyzed extensively. Cell phone records showed their last activity on Friday evening around 9 o'clock when Noah had sent a text message to his girlfriend saying they had set up camp and were about to start a fire. After that, all 3 phones went silent. GPS data from their devices placed them at Crystal Lake, consistent with their planned camping location. The phones were never found during the search, leading investigators to believe the boys had taken them when they left the campsite, whether voluntarily or otherwise. One theory that emerged early in the investigation was that the boys had decided to extend their trip without telling their parents. Teenagers sometimes made impulsive decisions, and perhaps they had hiked to a different area or decided to explore beyond their original plan. However, this theory was quickly dismissed. All 3 boys had part-time jobs they were supposed to return to on Monday. Jason had a shift at the hardware store, and Noah was scheduled to help his father with construction work. Caleb was supposed to start school shopping with his mother. None of them were the type to simply disappear without word, especially not all 3 simultaneously. Another possibility investigators considered was an encounter with wildlife. The Rockwood Mountains were home to black bears and mountain lions, though attacks on humans were extremely rare. The Colorado Division of Wildlife was consulted, and they found no evidence of unusual animal activity in the area during that weekend. No blood, torn clothing, or signs of a struggle were discovered at the campsite or surrounding areas. If a dangerous animal had been involved, there would typically be clear evidence of an attack. As weeks turned into months, the case began to attract attention from outside law enforcement agencies. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation assigned Agent Michael Vaughn to assist with the investigation. Vaughn brought federal resources and experience with complex missing person cases. He ordered a more systematic search of the wilderness areas surrounding Crystal Lake, using advanced equipment and expanded search grids. Teams with ground-penetrating radar examined areas where bodies might have been buried. Thermal imaging cameras were used to detect any heat signatures that might indicate human remains or hidden structures. The family struggled to maintain hope as autumn turned to winter. Linda Whitmore organized weekly vigils at the town park, where community members would gather to light candles and share memories of the boys. The Brennan family hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent named David Cross, who conducted his own parallel investigation. Cross interviewed dozens of people who had been in the Rockwood area that weekend, including other campers, hikers, and tourists. He created detailed timelines and maps, trying to identify any witnesses who might have been missed by the official investigation. During the winter months, search efforts were limited by weather conditions and heavy snowfall. The case remained active, but with no new leads or evidence, progress stalled. Detective Porter continued to follow up on tips that came in through the tip line, but most proved to be false alarms or cases of mistaken identity. Several times, people reported seeing the boys in other states, but when investigated, these sightings turned out to involve different teenagers or were simply inaccurate. In the spring of 2018, when the snow melted and mountain access was restored, a renewed search effort was launched. This time, the search focused on areas that had been inaccessible during the winter months. Specialized cave rescue teams explored underground systems that hadn't been thoroughly checked. Abandoned mining equipment and old structures in the area were examined with new technology. Bloodhounds were brought in to follow any remaining scent trails, though after 8 months, the chances of finding viable scent evidence were minimal. The case generated significant media attention throughout Colorado and neighboring states. A documentary crew from Denver filmed a segment about the disappearances for a regional television program about unsolved mysteries. The story was featured in national publications, and tips began coming in from across the country. Unfortunately, most of these leads proved fruitless. The increased publicity did result in several copycat reports and false confessions from people seeking attention, which consumed valuable investigative resources. By the summer of 2018, exactly 1 year after the boys vanished, the official search operations were scaled back. The case remained open and active, but the focus shifted from search and rescue to investigation and following up on tips. The families held a memorial service at Cedar Ridge Methodist Church, though they emphasized it was not a funeral since they still held hope that the boys would be found alive. The service was attended by hundreds of community members, classmates, and law enforcement officers who had worked on the case. Detective Porter maintained regular contact with the families throughout the investigation. She provided updates when possible and ensured they were informed of any developments before information was released to the media. The emotional toll on the parents was evident. Linda Whitmore had taken a leave of absence from her job as a school teacher. Noah's father, a construction foreman, struggled with depression and began drinking heavily. Caleb's parents, who owned a small restaurant in town, found it difficult to focus on their business while their son remained missing. As 2018 came to an end, the investigation had consumed thousands of hours and involved dozens of law enforcement personnel from multiple agencies. The case file filled several boxes with reports, interviews, photographs, and evidence logs. Despite all these efforts, the 3 boys remained missing, and their families were no closer to understanding what had happened to them during that August weekend in the Rockwood Mountains. The mystery continued to haunt Cedar Ridge, a town where everyone knew everyone, and where 3 promising young lives had simply vanished into the wilderness. The summer of 2019 brought renewed activity to the Rockwood Mountains as the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Service announced plans to expand the trail system. The project was designed to create better access for hikers and reduce overcrowding on existing paths. Construction crews from Denver-based Alpine Trail Systems were contracted to build a new 3-mile hiking trail that would connect the main Rockwood entrance to a scenic overlook called Eagle Point. The work was scheduled to begin in late September, taking advantage of the cooler fall weather before winter made construction impossible. On October 14, 2019, a crew of 6 construction workers began clearing vegetation and preparing the ground for the new trail. The team was led by foreman Rick Sullivan, a man in his 50s who had been building mountain trails for over 20 years. The work involved removing fallen trees, clearing brush, and leveling areas where the trail would eventually be paved. Using heavy machinery was not practical in the rugged terrain, so most of the work had to be done with hand tools and smaller equipment that could be transported on foot. Around 2 in the afternoon, crew member Danny Hayes was using a chainsaw to cut through a large fallen pine tree that blocked the proposed trail route. As he worked to remove the trunk, he noticed something unusual partially buried beneath the root system. At first glance, it appeared to be a piece of old mining equipment, possibly a water barrel or storage container left behind by miners decades earlier. The mountains were littered with such remnants from Colorado's mining history, and finding old metal objects in the wilderness was not uncommon. Hayes called over his supervisor, who decided they needed to move the object to continue their work. 2 other crew members, Tony Martinez and Kevin Walsh, helped dig around what they now could see was definitely a metal barrel. The container was roughly 3 feet tall and 2 feet in diameter, made of heavy steel that had rusted extensively over time. It was partially buried under years of accumulated soil, leaves, and debris. The weight suggested it was not empty, and there was a strong, unpleasant odor coming from the area around it. Sullivan made the decision to fully excavate the barrel before proceeding with the trail construction. Using shovels and a small portable winch, the crew spent nearly an hour carefully removing dirt and debris from around the container. As they worked, the smell became stronger, and Sullivan began to suspect they had found something more serious than old mining equipment. The barrel appeared to have been deliberately buried, not simply abandoned. There were scratch marks on the metal surface that looked recent compared to the general rust and weathering. When they finally freed the barrel from the ground, they could see that the top was sealed with what appeared to be modern welding, not the original factory sealing. The metal around the seal was newer, suggesting someone had opened the barrel and then resealed it. Sullivan immediately ordered his crew to stop work and step away from the discovery. His 20 years of experience in remote construction sites had taught him to recognize when something was potentially connected to criminal activity. The location where they found the barrel was approximately 4 miles from Crystal Lake, where the 3 teenagers had planned to camp 2 years earlier. Sullivan used his satellite phone to contact the Cedar Ridge Police Department. The call was received at 3:47 p.m. by dispatcher Jennifer Wong, who immediately transferred it to Detective Amanda Porter. Porter was in her office reviewing cold cases when she received the call about a suspicious barrel found in the Rockwood Mountains. Given the location and the ongoing missing persons case involving the 3 teenagers, she treated the discovery as potentially related to her investigation. She instructed the construction crew to secure the scene and avoid any further disturbance of the area. Within an hour, Porter arrived at the scene accompanied by 2 other officers and the county coroner, Dr. Patricia Mills. The hike to the construction site took 45 minutes, and they had to carry their equipment on foot since no vehicles could access the area. Upon examining the barrel, Porter immediately noticed several concerning details. The welding around the seal was amateur work, suggesting it had been done with portable equipment rather than in a professional shop. There were no identifying marks or serial numbers visible on the exterior, though years of rust may have obscured such details. Dr. Mills conducted a preliminary examination of the site and the barrel. The odor was consistent with decomposing organic material, though after potentially 2 years, identification would require laboratory analysis. The barrel's position suggested it had been placed there deliberately rather than washed down from a higher elevation during flooding or storms. The surrounding area showed signs of old disturbance, with unnatural patterns in the soil and vegetation that indicated someone had dug there previously. The decision was made to transport the entire barrel to the county morgue for proper examination in a controlled environment. This required a complex logistical operation. A helicopter was called in to lift the barrel out of the wilderness, while crime scene technicians documented everything about its location and condition. Photographs were taken from multiple angles, soil samples were collected, and the area was searched for any additional evidence or clues. News of the discovery reached the families of the missing teenagers before evening. Detective Porter personally visited each family to inform them of the development and explain what would happen next. The conversations were difficult. After 2 years without answers, the families had learned to live with uncertainty, but the discovery of human remains brought both hope for closure and fear of confirmation of their worst suspicions. Linda Whitmore later described the feeling as being trapped between wanting to know the truth and being terrified of what that truth might be. The examination of the barrel began the following morning at the Cedar Ridge County Morgue. Dr. Mills was assisted by forensic specialists from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. The unsealing process was filmed and documented in detail. When the barrel was finally opened, it contained human remains in an advanced state of decomposition, along with some fragments of clothing and personal items. The condition of the remains made immediate identification impossible without scientific analysis. Initial examination revealed the remains belonged to a young person, consistent with the age range of the missing teenagers. Fragments of clothing included pieces of a blue t-shirt and denim fabric, though 2 years of decomposition made determining original colors difficult. Most significantly, investigators found a class ring that was immediately recognizable. The ring belonged to Cedar Ridge High School's class of 2019, and the initials engraved inside matched those of Noah Brennan. The identification process would take several weeks to complete using dental records and DNA analysis, but the class ring provided strong preliminary evidence that they had found one of the missing boys. The discovery raised as many questions as it answered. Why was only one body in the barrel? What had happened to the other 2 teenagers? How had the body ended up in a location 4 miles from their last known campsite? The amateur welding suggested someone without professional skills had sealed the barrel, but who had access to welding equipment in the wilderness. Detective Porter expanded the investigation to include this new crime scene. The area around the discovery site was searched extensively for any additional evidence or clues about how the barrel had been transported there and buried. The terrain was rough and would have required considerable effort to bring a heavy barrel to that location. This suggested either someone very familiar with the area or someone willing to invest significant time and energy in concealing evidence. The construction crew was interviewed extensively about their discovery. Each worker was asked to describe exactly what they had seen and done, and their accounts were consistent. None of them had any prior knowledge of the missing teenagers' case beyond what had been reported in local news. The timing of the discovery appeared to be purely coincidental, as the new trail construction had not been planned when the boys disappeared 2 years earlier. The forensic examination of Noah Brennan's remains took place over several days under the supervision of Dr. Patricia Mills and specialists from the State Crime Laboratory. The advanced decomposition meant that determining the exact cause of death would be challenging, but several important details emerged from the analysis. The skeletal remains showed no obvious signs of trauma such as fractures, bullet holes, or blade marks that would indicate violent death. However, the condition of the remains and the circumstances of their discovery clearly indicated this was a homicide case rather than an accidental death. Toxicology tests were impossible due to the decomposition, but the positioning of the remains inside the barrel suggested the body had been placed there shortly after death. The way the bones were arranged indicated the person had been folded into a sitting position to fit inside the container. This required either significant strength or multiple people to accomplish. The clothing fragments found with the remains were sent for additional analysis, and investigators hoped that trace evidence might provide clues about the location where Noah had died or who had been responsible for placing him in the barrel. Detective Porter coordinated with federal authorities to expand the investigation. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was consulted to develop a profile of the person or persons responsible for Noah's death and the disappearance of the other 2 boys. Agent Sarah Kellerman, a specialist in cases involving missing children and young adults, arrived in Cedar Ridge to assist with the investigation. Her experience with similar cases across the country provided valuable perspective on potential motives and patterns of behavior. The location where the barrel was found became the center of an intensive search operation. Teams of investigators combed through every square foot of the surrounding area, looking for any evidence that might indicate what had happened to Jason Whitmore and Caleb Frost. Ground-penetrating radar was used to search for additional burial sites or hidden objects. Metal detectors swept the area for any items that might have been dropped or discarded. Cadaver dogs were brought in to search for any trace of human remains that might have been missed during the initial search 2 years earlier. Agent Kellerman reviewed all the evidence from the original investigation with fresh eyes. She was particularly interested in the single hiking boot that had been found at the boys' abandoned campsite at Crystal Lake. The boot belonged to Caleb Frost, and its placement next to the fire ring had always seemed deliberate rather than accidental. Kellerman theorized that it might have been left as a message or sign, possibly by one of the boys trying to communicate that they were in trouble or being forced to leave the area. The FBI analysis of the crime scene photos revealed several details that had not been fully explored during the original investigation. The campsite at Crystal Lake showed signs of hasty abandonment, but there were also indications that someone had returned to the site after the boys left. Certain items were arranged too neatly, and there were footprints that appeared to have been made at different times. This suggested that whoever was responsible for the boys' disappearance had revisited the campsite, possibly to remove evidence or stage the scene. The welding on the barrel became a significant focus of the investigation. The quality and technique suggested someone with basic welding skills but not professional training. Local welding shops, equipment rental companies, and hardware stores were contacted to determine if anyone had purchased or rented portable welding equipment around the time of the boys' disappearance. This proved to be a time-consuming process, as many transactions from 2 years earlier were not well documented, and cash purchases left no paper trail. Dr. Mills continued her examination of Noah's remains and made another important discovery. Embedded in the clothing fragments was a small piece of metal that appeared to be part of a zipper or snap from outdoor gear. The metal showed signs of being torn or cut rather than simply worn away by time. This suggested that Noah's clothing had been forcibly removed or damaged, possibly during a struggle or when his body was being prepared for concealment in the barrel. The community of Cedar Ridge struggled to process the news that one of their missing boys had been found dead while the other 2 remained missing. The confirmation that Noah Brennan had been murdered transformed the case from a search and rescue operation into a homicide investigation. Parents throughout the town began questioning the safety of allowing their children to venture into the wilderness areas that had always been considered safe and familiar. The local economy, which depended heavily on tourism and outdoor recreation, began to suffer as visitors canceled camping and hiking plans. Linda Whitmore, Jason's mother, found the partial resolution both heartbreaking and frustrating. While she felt sympathy for the Brennan family finally having some answers about their son's fate, she was tormented by not knowing what had happened to Jason. The discovery of Noah's body provided proof that something terrible had occurred during that camping trip, but it also raised the possibility that her son and Caleb Frost might still be alive somewhere, held captive or hiding in fear. The investigation team conducted interviews with dozens of people who had been in the Rockwood Mountains area during the weekend the boys disappeared. These included other campers, hikers, park employees, and local residents who lived near the mountain access roads. Several witnesses came forward with information they had not previously reported, often because they had not realized its potential importance at the time. One particularly significant witness was a local fisherman named Gary Henderson who had been at Crystal Lake on the Saturday morning after the boys arrived. Henderson told investigators that he had noticed the boys' campsite but had not seen the teenagers themselves. What struck him as unusual was the complete silence around their camp. Most teenage camping groups were noisy, especially in the morning when they were cooking breakfast or preparing for daily activities. He had assumed they were either still sleeping or had left early for a hike, but thinking back, he realized the silence had been unnatural. The fire ring showed signs of recent use, but there were no sounds of movement or conversation from the tent area. Another witness, Margaret Foster, had been hiking on a trail about 2 miles from Crystal Lake on Saturday afternoon. She reported seeing a man in camouflage clothing carrying what appeared to be camping equipment, but moving in the opposite direction from the main trails. The man had seemed to be in a hurry and had deliberately avoided making eye contact when she attempted to greet him in passing. At the time, she had assumed he was a hunter or another camper, but his behavior had struck her as odd enough that she remembered the encounter clearly. The FBI's investigation into the barrel itself revealed that it was a standard industrial container commonly used for storing chemicals or water. Similar barrels could be purchased from dozens of suppliers throughout Colorado and neighboring states. However, the specific type and age of the barrel narrowed the search considerably. Based on manufacturing marks and design features, experts determined it had been produced between 2010 and 2015, which helped establish a time frame for when it might have been acquired by the perpetrator. As autumn progressed into winter, the investigation continued with renewed intensity. The discovery of Noah's body had provided the first concrete evidence that a serious crime had occurred, transforming public perception of the case and increasing pressure on law enforcement to find answers. The families of all three boys remained in close contact, supporting each other through the difficult process of learning the truth about what had happened during that August weekend in 2017. Detective Porter worked tirelessly, knowing that finding the truth about Noah's death was the key to discovering what had happened to Jason Whitmore and Caleb Frost, and whether they might still be found alive. The breakthrough in the investigation came from an unexpected source in late November 2019. Gary Henderson, the fisherman who had noticed the unusual silence at the boys' campsite, contacted Detective Porter with additional information. He had been reviewing his own photographs from that weekend and discovered something he had overlooked. In the background of one photo taken near Crystal Lake, there was a figure partially visible through the trees. The person appeared to be watching the lake area from a concealed position, and the timestamp on the photo placed it at approximately 10 in the morning on Saturday, August 19, 2017. The photograph was enhanced by FBI technical specialists who were able to clarify details that had not been visible in the original image. The figure was clearly an adult male, wearing dark clothing and carrying what appeared to be a large backpack. Most importantly, the enhancement revealed that the person was holding what looked like binoculars or a small camera, suggesting he had been deliberately observing the area rather than simply passing through. The photo was circulated among local law enforcement and park personnel to see if anyone recognized the individual. Park Ranger Susan Holbrook immediately identified the person in the photograph. It was Douglas Ramsey, a 43-year-old local man who had been employed as a seasonal maintenance worker for the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Service. Ramsey had worked intermittently for the Park Service over several years, primarily doing trail maintenance and equipment repair during the summer months. Holbrook remembered him as a quiet, solitary person who seemed to prefer working alone and had extensive knowledge of the remote areas of the Rockwood Mountains. Detective Porter ran a background check on Douglas Ramsey and discovered several concerning details. He had been arrested twice for trespassing on private property, once for harassment of a female hiker, and had been fired from his Parks Department job in 2016 for inappropriate behavior toward visitors. Despite these red flags, he had been rehired on a temporary basis in 2017 due to staffing shortages. Most significantly, Ramsey had welding experience from his previous job at a manufacturing plant and owned portable welding equipment. The investigation team obtained a search warrant for Ramsey's property, a small cabin located on 5 acres of isolated land about 15 miles from the Rockwood entrance. The cabin was surrounded by dense forest and was accessible only by a narrow dirt road that was barely passable by vehicle. When officers arrived to execute the warrant on December 3, 2019, they found that Ramsey was not at home, but his truck was parked outside, suggesting he might be somewhere on the property. A search of the cabin revealed disturbing evidence that linked Ramsey to the missing teenagers. In a wooden chest hidden under his bed, investigators found personal items that belonged to Jason Whitmore and Caleb Frost. These included Jason's wallet with his driver's license, Caleb's Eagle Scout badge, and several photographs that appeared to have been taken from the boys' cameras. The photos showed the teenagers at their campsite, apparently unaware they were being watched from a distance. More damning evidence was discovered in Ramsey's workshop, a separate building behind the cabin. The portable welding equipment was there, along with metal remnants that appeared to match the type of welding used to seal the barrel containing Noah's body. There were also detailed maps of the Rockwood area with various locations marked in red ink, including Crystal Lake and the spot where the barrel had been found. A handwritten journal contained entries describing his observations of campers and hikers over several years, with particular attention paid to young people camping alone or in small groups. The search team found Ramsey approximately half a mile from his cabin, sitting by a small stream with a hunting rifle across his lap. He did not resist arrest and appeared almost relieved when the officers approached him. During the initial questioning, he admitted to being responsible for the deaths of all 3 teenagers but refused to provide details about what had happened or where the other 2 bodies might be located. His only statement was that he had been trying to protect them from making the same mistakes he had made when he was young. Over the following weeks, investigators pieced together the events of that August weekend through evidence found at Ramsey's property and his eventual confession. Ramsey had been watching the boys' campsite from the surrounding forest, waiting for an opportunity to approach them. On Saturday morning, he had confronted them at their camp, initially claiming to be a park ranger conducting a safety inspection. When the boys became suspicious and tried to leave, Ramsey had threatened them with a weapon and forced them to accompany him to his cabin. According to Ramsey's confession, he had kept the 3 boys captive at his cabin for several days, believing he could convince them to stay voluntarily. He described a twisted fantasy in which he would become a mentor figure to young people who reminded him of himself at their age. When Noah attempted to escape on the 3rd day, a struggle ensued during which the teenager was accidentally killed. Ramsey claimed he had not intended to hurt any of the boys, but the situation had spiraled out of control. The deaths of Jason and Caleb occurred over the following days, according to Ramsey's account. Terrified by what had happened to their friend and desperate to escape, both boys had tried to flee at different times. Ramsey admitted to killing them but maintained it had been in self-defense when they attacked him with tools from his workshop. His story was inconsistent and self-serving, but physical evidence supported the basic timeline of events he described. Ramsey led investigators to the burial sites of Jason Whitmore and Caleb Frost in January 2020. Both bodies were found in shallow graves on his property, about a quarter-mile from the cabin in opposite directions. The remains were in better condition than Noah's had been, as they had been buried in soil rather than sealed in a metal container. Forensic examination confirmed that both boys had died from blunt force trauma, contradicting Ramsey's claims of self-defense. The trial of Douglas Ramsey began in September 2020 and lasted 6 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of premeditated murder, including the photographs found in his possession, the detailed maps of the area, and the journal entries describing his surveillance of potential victims. The defense attempted to portray Ramsey as mentally ill and claimed the deaths were the result of a psychological breakdown rather than deliberate murder. However, the jury was convinced by the evidence of planning and the deliberate concealment of the bodies. On October 28, 2020, Douglas Ramsey was convicted on 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing hearing, family members of all 3 boys were given the opportunity to address the court. Linda Whitmore spoke for all the families when she said that while the conviction could not bring back their children, knowing the truth about what had happened provided some measure of closure after more than 3 years of uncertainty. The case had a lasting impact on the Cedar Ridge community and on policies regarding background checks for seasonal park employees. Douglas Ramsey's history of inappropriate behavior should have disqualified him from working in areas where he had access to visitors, particularly young people. The Colorado Parks and Wildlife Service implemented new screening procedures and increased supervision of seasonal workers in response to the tragedy. The families of Jason Whitmore, Noah Brennan, and Caleb Frost established a memorial fund in their sons' names to support youth outdoor education programs. They wanted to ensure that other young people would not be discouraged from experiencing the natural beauty of Colorado's wilderness areas, while also promoting safety awareness and proper supervision for youth camping and hiking activities. The Memorial Fund also supported search and rescue training programs to help ensure that future missing person cases would be resolved more quickly. Detective Amanda Porter retired from the Cedar Ridge Police Department in 2021, citing the emotional toll of the case as a contributing factor in her decision. She had worked tirelessly for more than 3 years to find answers for the families and bring Douglas Ramsey to justice. In her final report, she noted that the case demonstrated the importance of following up on seemingly minor witness accounts and the value of community cooperation in solving complex crimes. The photograph taken by Gary Henderson had ultimately been the key to identifying the perpetrator and bringing closure to one of Colorado's most tragic missing persons cases.